dark dungeon and 5 friends. The summons arrived on a moonless night, a parchment sealed with the crest of House Blackwood. Inside the grand hall of Castle Alistair, the air was thick with the scent of old stone and fear. Lord Gideon Blackwood, a man whose face was etched with a lifetime of worry, stood before the 5 adventurers. His hands trembled as he gestured to a large, empty velvet box. "It was the whispering compass," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Stolen. It is said to have the power to guide through the deepest darkness, but in the wrong hands, it corrupts. The thieves' trail leads to the Dreadwood and a cave known as the Maw of Regret. Please, you must retrieve it before its song turns to a scream." The party was a strange but formidable sight. Silas, the wood elf ranger, a gaunt figure with eyes like polished emeralds, rested a hand on the hilt of his short sword. His senses were his first line of defense, and they already pricked with unease. Next to him, Lyra, a high elf druid, held a staff of gnarled rowan wood. She felt the sorrow of the stolen compass from the very earth beneath her feet. Brundir, a stout mountain dwarf cleric, hefted his shield, its polished surface reflecting the flickering torches. His faith was his bulwark against the coming shadows. Kaelin, the tabaxi wizard, a feline humanoid with a coat of midnight black fur, adjusted his spectacles, his mind already racing through spells of detection. And finally, Gears, a gnome artificer, tinkered with the intricate gears of a small, bronze automaton perched on his shoulder, its tiny optical lenses glinting in the light. The journey began at dawn, with the sun a cold, indifferent eye in the sky. As they entered the Dreadwood, the name seemed less a label and more a curse. The trees grew in gnarled, twisted shapes, their branches skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. The forest floor was a mush of decaying leaves that muffled their footsteps, making every snap of a twig feel like a cannon shot. Silas led the way, his keen senses on high alert. "They're close," he muttered, pointing to a snapped branch that hadn't been touched by any animal. "And they're not trying to hide." "I can feel the pain of this place," Lyra said softly, her fingers brushing against the bark of an ancient oak. "The spirits of the forest are weeping. There is a disharmony, a sourness in the air." Suddenly, the clockwork automaton on Gear's shoulder whirred to a stop. Its optical lenses went dark, and it emitted a high-pitched, static whine. "Something's draining it," Gear said, his voice laced with concern. "Its magical reserves are being consumed by some ambient force. I've never seen anything like it." As they delved deeper, the sound of the forest began to change. What was once the rustling of leaves and the calls of birds became a cacophony of whispers. It was a chorus of faint, disembodied voices, too soft to make out words, but just loud enough to set teeth on edge. Kaelin's whiskers twitched. "It feels like a magical echo," he whispered, his ears swiveling to pinpoint the source. "Like something broke the silence of this place so thoroughly that it's still bleeding into the world." The whispers grew louder, more distinct. They were no longer a chorus, but individual voices, frantic and pleading. They led the party to a gaping black hole in the base of a jagged rock formation. This was the Maw of Regret. The name was chillingly accurate as a feeling of deep, profound sadness washed over them the moment they stood before it. Brundir raised his holy symbol, his brow furrowed. "My gods are silent here," he said, the words heavy with disbelief. "My connection is frayed." Whatever foulness inhabits this place, it's a wound on the very fabric of the world. The maw swallowed the light. Gear's automaton was useless, but he had prepared for this. From a small satchel, he pulled out a clockwork lantern, its light fueled by a small ethereal core. The lantern's glow was a fragile bubble against the encroaching dark. Inside the cave, the horror intensified. The air was thick and stagnant, smelling of rust and death. The walls were slick with a slimy substance that seemed to writhe in the lantern light. Veins of something that looked like black, pulsating moss ran along the cavern walls, throbbing with a slow, sickly rhythm. Every sound echoed unnaturally, a single drop of water sounding like a heavy footfall. Silas's ranger instincts screamed at him to turn back, to flee, but the whispers had grown to a chorus of pleas, and they were all whispering one word now: compass. They moved deeper, navigating a maze of cramped, winding tunnels. The whispers became more intelligible now. They were fragments of memories, of loss and regret. They heard a mother crying for her child, a warrior lamenting a lost battle, a lover weeping over an empty grave. The memories were not their own, but they felt the pain as if it were. The compass, Kalen said, his voice strained. It amplifies regret. It turns sorrow into power. They finally reached a cavern, larger and more open than the tunnels before. It was a hideout, but a horrifying one. Strange symbols were scrawled in blood on the walls, and a foul-smelling smoke wafted from a fire pit. 3 figures stood near a pile of loot, dominated by a large iron cage containing an unnaturally still animal. The main thief, a gaunt, dark-haired man with eyes that held a frantic, manic gleam, stood with the whispering compass clutched in his hand. The artifact was a beautiful thing, a silver disc with an intricate needle that pulsed with a faint, violet light. "You've come for this," the thief sneered, his voice a dry, rasping sound. "You're too late. Its secrets are mine now. The sorrow, the unending sorrow. It's a song of power." "You're mad," Brundir boomed, raising his shield. "Let your captives go and give us the compass." The thief laughed, a terrible sound that scraped against the cavern walls. "They're no captives. They are my kin, and their suffering is my strength." At his command, one of the 2 other thieves stepped forward. She was a cleric, but her robes were stained with dried blood, and her holy symbol was a twisted, grotesque mockery of a healing deity. She began to chant a hymn, and the wounds on the thief's face began to close, but the flesh looked sickly, as if it were being sealed with rot. The other thief, a hulking fighter, hefted a crude, jagged greataxe, his eyes wide and vacant. "I need more," the thief hissed, a look of pure, crazed ecstasy on his face. He flung open the cage, and the dire wolf within stirred. But it was not a wolf. It was a skeletal beast, its ribs showing through taut gray skin, its eyes 2 smoldering coals. A low growl rumbled in its throat, a sound of profound, endless hunger. "And for a little more help," the thief said with a wicked grin, "I have a new friend." He raised his hand, and a creature of shadow and wire, a twisted facsimile of a bird, peeled itself from the cavern wall. It had no eyes, only empty sockets that stared into nothingness, and its talons dripped with the substance that sizzled as it hit the ground. The battle was not one of skill and strength, but of sanity and desperation. The fighter charged with a feral roar, his axe swinging wildly, while the ghastly cleric kept the thief's wounds closing. The skeletal wolf moved with an unnatural speed, its jaws snapping at Silas's legs, and the shadowbird familiar darted and weaved, its talons tearing at Kaelin's robes. The whispers in the cavern grew to a deafening roar, a chorus of agony. The compass in the thief's hand pulsed brighter, and the shadows seemed to thicken around him. Brundir's divine light struggled to pierce the darkness, and Lyra's spells of growth withered and died as they left her hand. "He's using the compass to absorb the sorrow of this place," Kaelin shouted, conjuring a bolt of pure arcane energy. It struck the thief, but the wound was quickly sealed by the twisted cleric's foul magic. Silas, seeing the hopelessness of a direct assault, aimed his bow not at the thief, but at the compass. The arrow flew true, striking the artifact. It didn't break. Instead, it let out a soul-shattering shriek of pure, distilled despair. The light within it flared, then went out. The whispers in the cavern instantly silenced. The thief staggered, a look of confusion crossing his face as the source of his power was cut off. The skeletal wolf collapsed into a pile of dust and bone, and the shadow bird unraveled into nothingness. The fighter stood still for a moment, his vacant eyes blinking before they cleared, and he fell to his knees, clutching his head in pain. The cleric's healing spell failed, and she too collapsed, clutching her now useless holy symbol. The silence was a palpable relief, but it was not a joyous one. The air still hung heavy with the echo of the cavern's pain. The party, exhausted and shaken, retrieved the whispering compass. Its needle was motionless now, its silver surface dull and lifeless. As they left the Maw of Regret, they did not speak. The whispers were gone, but the memories of them remained. They had come to retrieve an object, but they left carrying something far heavier. The horror wasn't in the fight, but in the knowledge that sorrow could be weaponized, and that sometimes silence was the most terrifying sound of all.